More than 2,000 years before Wall Street was built, long before stock tickers, trading apps, or billion-dollar hedge funds, a quiet man living in an ancient Greek city pulled off a financial move so brilliant it changed history. He didn't have inside information, and he certainly didn't have much money. In fact, his neighbors openly mocked him for being poor. They told him his life's work was completely useless. But in a matter of months, this mocked and penniless man would make an absolute fortune. He would humiliate his critics. And without even trying, he would demonstrate a secret about money that powers the entire global economy today. To be perfectly fair, historians agree that no single person literally invented investing on a random Tuesday. Human beings have been trading goods, taking risks, and seeking profit since the very dawn of civilization. But there is a reason we are still talking about this one specific man, a philosopher named Thales of Miletus, who lived around 600 BC. Thales didn't just trade one physical thing for another. He did something entirely new. He figured out how to use information to buy the future. And when you understand exactly how he did it, you will never look at the stock market the same way again. Thales was not a businessman. He was a thinker. He spent his days studying mathematics, geometry, and the stars. He was one of the first people in human history to try and explain the world through natural laws, instead of just blaming everything on angry gods. But in the bustling, wealthy city of Miletus, being a philosopher didn't pay the bills. People respected his intelligence, but they also laughed at him behind his back. The wealthy merchants of the city would look at his worn-out clothes and ask him a very simple, stinging question. If you are so incredibly smart, Thales, then why are you so poor? For years, Thales ignored them. He didn't care about money. He cared about knowledge. But eventually, the mockery became too loud. The constant disrespect bothered him. He decided he needed to teach the merchants a lesson. He needed to prove that a philosopher could easily become rich, but they simply chose to focus on more important things. To pull off this ultimate revenge, Thales needed a plan. And he found his answer by looking up at the night sky. It was the middle of winter. In ancient Greece, the economy ran on olives. Olive oil was the lifeblood of the ancient world. It was used for everything from cooking meals to lighting lamps to bathing. But during this particular winter, the olive business was dead. The previous few harvests had been absolutely terrible. Because of this, the heavy stone machines used to crush the olives and extract the oil, known as olive presses, were sitting completely empty. Their owners were losing money, entirely convinced that the upcoming autumn harvest would be just as disastrous as the last few. The entire city was gripped by total pessimism. This is where Thales made his move. While everyone else was complaining about the bad weather and the ruined crops, Thales had been carefully tracking the stars and studying the weather patterns. He realized something that the wealthy merchants didn't. The long string of bad weather was finally about to break. Based on his careful studies, the upcoming autumn was going to bring perfect conditions for growing olives. It was going to be a massive bumper crop. But Thales had a major problem. Even though he knew a massive harvest was coming, he was still a poor philosopher. He didn't have enough money to buy his own olive fields. He didn't have enough money to buy his own olive presses. So, how do you make a fortune when you have almost no money to start with? Thales walked up to the owners of the olive presses in the dead of winter. He made them an incredibly strange offer. He offered to pay them a very small amount of money right now, just a tiny deposit, in exchange for a simple promise. The promise was that when the harvest season arrived months later, Thales would have the exclusive right to rent their presses at a standard, pre-agreed price. The press owners eagerly agreed. To them, Thales was a complete fool. The harvest had been terrible for years. Why would anyone pay real money in the cold of winter for the right to rent an olive press in autumn? They happily took his small deposits, laughing at the foolish philosopher parting with his last few coins. Thales quietly went from owner to owner, putting down small deposits until he had locked in the rights to almost every single olive press in the city and the surrounding areas. Then he waited. Winter turned to spring, and spring turned to summer. Just as Thales had predicted, the weather was absolutely perfect. The olive trees exploded with fruit. It was one of the biggest harvests the region had ever seen. Suddenly, thousands of farmers realized they had a desperate problem. They had literal mountains of olives that would rot and become worthless if they didn't crush them into oil immediately. Panic set in. The farmers rushed to the olive presses, willing to pay almost any price to rent the machines. But when they got there, they found a massive surprise waiting for them. The original owners didn't control the presses anymore. One man held the legal rights to use every single machine in the region. Thales of Miletus. Thales held a complete monopoly. Since the farmers were desperate and had no other choice, Thales rented the presses out on his own terms. He charged a massive premium, renting them to the farmers for far more money than he had promised to pay the original owners. Money absolutely poured in. By the end of the season, Thales had made an unbelievable fortune. He had successfully cornered the entire market. He proved to the wealthy merchants that he could easily play their game and win. And then, completely satisfied with his victory, he simply went back to studying the stars. But why does this ancient story matter today? Because what Thales did wasn't just a clever trick to get rich quick. It was a masterclass in the core rules of investing. For one thing, Thales showed the world the exact difference between gambling and investing. Gambling is based entirely on luck. You roll the dice and blindly hope for the best. Investing is based on information and analysis. Thales didn't just guess that the harvest would be good. He studied the data. He used his knowledge of weather and astronomy to gain a massive edge over everyone else. He replaced blind luck with calculated probability. He also understood the powerful secret of buying undervalued assets. He bought the rights to the presses in the middle of winter when everyone was depressed and nobody else wanted them. In the investing world, this is exactly like buying great stocks during a scary market crash when everyone else is terrified and selling. He bought when prices were at their absolute lowest because he knew the true hidden value of those presses was much higher than the crowd believed. But perhaps most amazingly, Thales basically invented what modern Wall Street calls an options contract. He didn't buy the heavy olive presses outright. He just bought the right to use them later. By paying a very small deposit, he controlled a massive amount of valuable property. He risked a tiny amount of money for the chance to make an unlimited amount of money. Today, trillions of dollars are traded on global stock markets using this exact same principle, all tracing back to a philosopher who just wanted to prove a point. The world has changed drastically since the days of ancient Greece. We don't trade olive presses in the town square anymore. We use high-speed computers to trade tiny digital pieces of global corporations in fractions of a second. But the actual rules of the game have not changed one bit since Thales looked up at the stars. The best investors today, people like Warren Buffett, do exactly what Thales did. They completely ignore the panic of the crowd. They look for valuable things that are currently unloved and priced cheaply. They gather information that others ignore, and they patiently wait for the seasons to change. They know that human emotions like fear and greed will always create opportunities for those who can keep a cool head. Thales of Miletus proved that true wealth doesn't come from working the hardest, or even from having the most money to start with. True wealth comes from seeing exactly what everyone else is looking at, but understanding it entirely differently. He showed us that the greatest asset any investor will ever own isn't a stock, a bond, or a piece of expensive real estate. It's their own mind. If you love discovering this hidden piece of financial history, please hit that subscribe button. It completely helps the channel grow and allows us to keep digging up these incredible true stories for you. Now I've got a question for you. If you could predict one industry perfectly for the next 10 years, which would you choose and why? Let me know in the comments. I can't wait to read your answers.